Hi. In the last two videos in this series, I've focused on some things that I've done in my life for only a few years or so. In this video, I'd like to explore something I've been doing for over 25 years now, teaching psychology at the college level. And like it says in the title of this video, I'd like to focus specifically on what I've learned from that experience over these many years. Not so much the relatively superficial lessons about how to conduct oneself properly in the classroom, for instance, but the deeper life lessons I personally managed to glean from the experience of teaching. Anyhow, a big part of my motivation for making this video has to do with you students out there. Basically, I often feel like we professors do a pretty good job of conveying information within our discipline, but we rarely take the time and energy to speak to you students about the deeper, more personal side of our time with you. Basically, what it's like for us to be with you in this mad, seething, kaleidoscopic world as we struggle to make sense of it together. So I'm making this video mostly to do just that, to tell you students about the kinds of things that we teachers normally keep hidden, but things that directly impinge upon our time with you. So, with all of that in mind, I'd say that one of the main things I've learned from teaching is that the divide that usually separates us teachers from you students is actually far more artificial than it seems to be at first. Basically, I've learned that none of us is either a pure teacher or a pure student. In fact, I'd say that we're all teachers in some ways and we're all students in some ways. Consequently, despite my age and my professorial position within the academic world, the fact is that I still feel mostly like you inside. In other words, I feel like I'm still fundamentally a student of life and like I still have much to learn. And I've learned to accept and honor that sensation and to remain as open as I can to a youthful sense of surprise and wonder, to the experience of newness, and to the exhilaration of intellectual adventure. At the same time, I've learned that it's important to embody a passion for what I teach, and especially a passion that's obvious and infectious and inviting to you students. Basically, I've learned that it's important to follow the arc of an intrinsically motivated engagement with you, rather than one that's governed by the dubious enticements of intellectual ambition and ego gratification. In my view, that's important because if the institution of education is to reach its deeper potential, and if we are to reach our own deeper potential within its ambit, the craft of teaching must reach beyond all of our easily justifiable extrinsic motivations and rationales, all of our cheap and facile answers to its riddle, and invite us, teachers and students alike, to dwell in the intrinsic value of teaching and learning. Basically, I've learned that we have to encourage each other to love what we're doing and ultimately the lives we're leading for their own sake and for their own inherent value, and not merely because today's social conventions demand that we jump through various hoops in order to earn a living. And that's why a teacher's passion is so important, even if it's not typically valued too highly. It's because when a teacher's passion becomes obvious and accessible to you students, it automatically issues an implicit invitation to you to start caring about things for their own intrinsic worth, and eventually to live your lives oriented toward what really matters in this world. Of course, whether you take up that invitation is completely up to you. Invariably, some students do and some students don't, and most students fall somewhere in the middle. But I would say that that may be the most important thing. After all, maybe you've noticed that it's fairly easy for us to become knowledgeable and proficient in things that we really only semi-care about, and ultimately to live lives that we really only semi-care about. If you haven't noticed that, take a look around at the adults that are maybe a few years older than yourself, and ask yourself if that's really how you want to live your life. But at the same time, I would say that that's not actually the point of education, nor the point of human existence more generally. The real challenge is to take up the reality of life with verve and a sense of engagement and participation, and a profound and abiding capacity to care about ourselves and our world, even as we're developing our ability to understand all of that in very rational and coherent ways. So I would say that the first threefold thing I've learned from teaching is to live with more passion and a greater sense of intrinsic joy and a correlative willingness to remain a student at heart and not be ashamed to express all of that in the classroom or in life more generally. Anyhow, the second thing I've learned from teaching is to keep things a little bit more in perspective. Not to indulge so much in the silly, self-important hubris of thinking that I or anyone else has the final answers to life, the universe, and everything. I suppose that another way of talking about that would be to say that I've learned some invaluable lessons in existential humility from the experience of teaching. I've learned over time to open myself a little bit more to the immensity of our mysterious universe. And in the face of that staggering perception, I've gained a sense for how small our human attempts to fathom it really are in comparison, and that we teach best what we most need to learn ourselves. And so, I'd say that I've learned an appreciation for human fallibility from teaching. What I mean more specifically is that while we teachers undeniably give many wonderful gifts to you students, we also inevitably transmit our own personal toxins and demons to you at the same time. That's inevitable because the craft of teaching is not the domain of gods or demigods, but something very human, and hence something very imperfect. Consequently, I've learned that no matter how brilliant and beneficial it may be, the time we spend with you as your teachers is never simply an unadulterated boon to you students. It always contains some intimation of bane too, sometimes subtly and sometimes more obviously. Of course, our hope as teachers is to keep the ratio of boon to bane as high as possible. But I've learned that it's sheer folly to indulge in the fantasy that the gifts we're offering you are a pure, unalloyed manifestation of the good because, well, that's not how human reality actually works. So I've learned that it's worthwhile to take pains to let you students know about that up front, especially since it's not something that we teachers easily admit, even to ourselves. So I tried to do that, typically once or twice during a semester. First as a way of being more honest and direct with you than usual, but more importantly, so that you can be forewarned about it and hopefully begin to filter out as much of the inevitable poison as possible, with the full knowledge that when your turn to teach arrives, you too will transmit some irreducible fraction of toxicity to your own students, despite all of your best intentions to do otherwise. And I've learned that although all of that may sound a bit morbid, it really does nothing to diminish the importance or value of teaching, or of our lives more generally for that matter. It's simply a way of recognizing what's usually difficult for us to admit and own, namely, that our desire to benefit the world is ultimately interwoven with our desire to diminish and destroy it. In fact, often enough, both of those impulses play out simultaneously, both in teaching and in life more generally. And I've also learned that the world's great creators are also the world's great destroyers. That becoming a teacher also means becoming a destroyer of habits, excuses, and threadbare values, for instance. And maybe most of all, a destroyer of all of our tawdry and shallow evasions of what's real. And I've learned that it takes courage as a teacher to face all of that, to own it as part of our craft and part of our presence to you students. And most of all, I've learned that there's value in making it real and palpable to you in the classroom, even in the midst of conveying concrete factual information. Sure, being a teacher also takes some measure of innate intellectual talent as well as an ability to make things clear and accessible, but at the end of the day, what it really takes is courage. That peculiar capacity of the human heart to step forward even in the face of our deepest anxieties and fears. Consequently, and somewhat surprisingly, I've learned that being your teacher involves cultivating a certain familiarity with the sensation of danger. As we've seen, that's first because of the inevitability of inadvertently transmitting to you what is warped and unresolved in us. But more generally, and more importantly, well, it's a dangerous thing to be party to someone's personal transformation, intellectual or otherwise. It's a risky thing to feel that delicious, dangerous dance of possibility, teetering uncertainly in a precarious and perilous balance, as it so often is for young adults. That's mostly because, as your teachers, we don't really know what the outcome of our teaching will be for you. Will our best efforts be nothing more than another source of ennui and alienation for you? How will our teaching really affect you, or maybe change you, or perhaps even alter the course of your life? Naturally, we hope for the best, but the fact is that none of us really knows, and so we teach you always in relation to the abyss of our own unknowing, and everything we say and do for you in the classroom is secretly suspended over that terrifying chasm. Consequently, I suppose that one of the things I've learned from teaching is to live with a measure of faith. And what faith means is to suppose that despite all of my own personal failings and shortcomings, along with the myriad difficulties and problems inherent to the craft itself, the good will ultimately eclipse everything else. But possibly the biggest thing I've learned from teaching is that it's all ultimately about life, and that our best and most enduring lessons are conveyed in the margins of what we do, in the subtle subtext of our presence, and in our capacity to care in a particular way. That's where teaching really leaves its mark, at least in my experience. As for the rest, all of the myriad details and minutiae we try to get you students to master, well, the unsettling reality of the pedagogical situation is that you'll probably forget most of that in a year or two anyhow. So, the real question, the real riddle of the craft of teaching is, what part of it endures? What makes it all worthwhile in some reasonably substantive and convincing way? And over the years, I've come to sense that the best answer to that question, the thing that we teachers really convey to you, is how we care. The rest, well, the rest falls away quickly and easily, like leaves caught in the slipstream of the autumn wind, in the ferocious storm of time and sensation that is human existence, that is life itself. Basically, I've learned from teaching, from the years that I've spent with you students, that caring is what really matters. Well, okay. Many thanks to you students and you viewers in YouTube land for being in the storm of life with me. Take care of your souls. Peace out.